Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today we're unpacking a really fascinating section from a foundational systems engineering book, specifically zooming in on Product Systems Engineering, or PSE. We're going to look at the exact frameworks, the tables, and the diagrams that ensure a brilliant technical idea doesn't just, stay an idea, but actually transforms into a successful product that survives out there in the real world. So here's our roadmap. We're going to start with an introduction to PSE, look at creating system value, break down the actual anatomy of products, discuss architectures and trade-offs, highlight the software revolution, and finally assess readiness levels. All right, Section 1, Introduction to PSE, where engineering meets the market. Look, to start off, we really have to bridge that massive gap between pure technical development and actual market readiness. It's a super common trap, right? Thinking that just because you built a technically superior product, the market's just going to automatically adopt it. Well, PSE is the discipline that actively forces those two worlds to shake hands. So, the crucial point here is that PSE isn't just about building things. It is literally the absolute core of the new product development process, or NPDP. And it really doesn't matter if you're dealing with a consumer-based private enterprise or, say, a public, not-for-profit market addressing big national needs like healthcare or defense. PSE is the engine. It's that integrated approach you absolutely need to successfully develop and, frankly, deploy those products into completely different market segments. And this is a serious balancing act. It requires overlapping two traditionally separate worlds if you want to ensure market survival. On one side, you've got traditional systems engineering. Concept generation, design, technical deployment. But exactly parallel to that, on the same timeline, you've got market development, researching the market, analyzing data, and fighting for product acceptance. PSE sits right there at the overlap. It pulls in everything: logistics, distribution, quality, even how you're eventually going to dispose of the product. It's the ultimate balancing act. Moving on to Section 2, Creating System Value, and specifically, exceeding product costs. Now, what's really fascinating about this phase is that an enterprise has to create value that actually exceeds the cost of the product in the customer's eyes. Honestly, it doesn't matter if you're a for-profit tech giant or a public agency. If that perceived value doesn't outpace the cost, your product is going to fail, plain and simple. To consistently deliver that kind of value, we can look at Ring's framework from 1998 to see how this builds a continuous cycle. It asserts that a real systems approach has to consider three interdependent levels. First, you've got Step 1, understanding stakeholder value. Then, Step 2 translates that directly into a specific customer need. And finally, Step 3 is engineering the actual system solution. Value is really only realized when you factor in the time, cost, and resources appropriate for every key stakeholder in that loop. Which brings us to a huge foundational rule of thumb. You simply cannot engineer in a vacuum. The operational concept, the ConOps, absolutely must dictate the physical traits of your product. The user is going to view your product as an asset within their own systems, right? So if you don't intimately understand their specific operational activities, well, you're going to end up building the completely wrong characteristics into your final product. All right, Section 3, the anatomy of products, going way beyond just the physical box. Let's actually get into the building blocks here. Because understanding what composes a product, well, it's not a trivial task for a systems engineer. It goes so far beyond just a physical item you grab off a store shelf. Take a really close look at this breakdown. Notice how we've isolated the core elements required for a system. It's actually not unusual for a product to require simultaneous development across all these totally diverse domains. I mean, a single product might consist of hardware, software, trained personnel, physical facilities, data streams, raw materials, media, and specific techniques. Developing a successful product means you have to actively factor every single one of these structures into your deployment plan. And beyond just those physical and digital pieces, you've got to engineer the invisible infrastructure behind it. These are the hidden complexities. Think about it. You have to navigate incredibly stringent certifications for things like safety or electromagnetic emissions. You might even have to engineer a complicated multimodal distribution network, warehouses, retail depots, just to get the thing to the end user. Because let's face it, a brilliant product is completely useless if it's permanently stuck on a cargo ship. And then, of course, you have to engineer the sustainment system, the service facilities, the technicians, the repair manuals that actually keep the product alive. Which leads us to Section 4, Architectures and Trade-offs, the ultimate balancing act. So with all that said, how do we balance all these competing product types and those hidden complexities? Basically, we rely on architecture and the really painful necessity of making trade-offs. Because you just can't have it all.
When you're assessing a product system's value, you have to make some genuinely hard choices. Striving for superior quality and maximum efficiency, well, that's inevitably going to require ruthless trade-offs against your development schedule and your budget limits. And these trade-offs are happening constantly. We're talking at the product level, the subsystem level, and the core technology level.
Thankfully, we aren't flying blind here. We have analytical methods to help us out. Tools like the ATAM, or Architecture Trade-off Analysis method, which comes from the Software Engineering Institute, are absolutely vital. They don't just show you if a design technically works, they reveal exactly how your quality goals are conflicting with one another. ATAM evaluations expose the architectural risks that might actually stop your organization from hitting its business goals. It shows you, plain as day, exactly how one feature trades off against another.
All right, Section 5, the software revolution and embedding functionality. Now we're getting into a massive, undeniable shift in modern product design, the huge expansion of software.
Hardware used to be the undisputed star of the show, but today, software is the primary driver of functionality across almost every single industry. We are seeing the deep embedding of software accounting for a bigger and bigger portion of what a product actually does. Whether we're talking about massive transportation vehicles, heavy industrial equipment, or just standard home appliances, some of which today honestly contain more lines of code than the early space shuttles. It's crazy.
And this trend really highlights exactly where we're heading. Isolated, standalone products, they're effectively dead. The current macro trend in engineering is developing a network of systems that incorporate highly complex sensing and activating functions. Your product is no longer just a standalone tool. It is literally a node in a much larger software-driven service ecosystem.
Finally, Section 6, assessing readiness levels, proving system maturity. Before we even think about launching this incredibly complex, software-embedded, multi-domain system we've just built, we have to definitively prove it is mature enough to survive out there.
We don't just sit around and guess if a product is ready. We use strict technology readiness assessments, or TRAs. As a new system is being developed, it is absolutely essential to verify and validate that it's actually mature enough to be released. These established tools help qualify our development progress, and honestly, they allow us to justify some incredibly complex investment decisions to our stakeholders, making sure we deploy our technology at exactly the right time.
The most famous metric for this, originally formalized by NASA and heavily used by the Department of Defense, is the Technology Readiness Level, or TRL scale. Just look at this table. It's a highly digestible way to track a product's maturity. You start all the way down at TRL 1, where basic principles are just observed and reported. Then you grind your way through levels 2 through 8, which encompasses all the stepping stones of rigorous component and system testing. And finally, you hit TRL 9, where the actual system is fully flight-proven through successful mission operations.
So I want to leave you with this final thought to really chew on. When you look at your own organization, are you truly bridging that gap between pure engineering and market reality? Is your next big idea just a neat technical trick stuck somewhere around TRL 3, or is it a fully realized, rigorously traded-off product system that's actually ready to dominate the market? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and remember, always keep the whole system in mind.